Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to sow sweet Italian Genovese basil. Now you want to sow your basil seeds indoors 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. Right now, that means here early April. We are 4 weeks before our last frost. Now you see how tiny basil seeds are, and they do require light to germinate. So only press them into the top. Don't cover them with soil. I tend to sow 2 to 3 seeds per cell, and later I'll thin them down to 1 plant per cell. Now, basil roots grow really quickly and they can really fill up a pot. So if you're starting your basil before 4 weeks, if you're starting it earlier, you're going to have to pot it up. But honestly, my grow room is full. Plus, I plan to give most of these away, so I don't plan to pot them up. Now, basil germinates best at 75 to 85 degrees. It tends to germinate 10 to 15 days. Now I'm going to start hardening it off, getting it used to outside after the last frost, early May. And I want to transplant it into the garden 2 weeks after the last frost. Here, that's mid-May or Mother's Day. Now, this tray needs to find a shelf, and like I said, this room is full. So let's move it to the other side of the basement. Now this room is colder. It tends to run 60 to 65 degrees, so I am going to use a heat mat. We're going to let it share with the tomatoes. And I do cover my seeds with a dome to help hold in the moisture. Can you see how I'm preparing for more seeds? All the spring vegetables and flowers are either outside hardening off or in the ground. Soon it's going to be green in here all over again. Good afternoon and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today is the very end of April. We're almost at our last frost, so it's time to start hardening off our basil. Now these seedlings are 3 weeks old. They germinated in 3 days. Today, they're only going to stay outside for 2 hours. Then they're going to come back under these lights in the kitchen. And I've also set up some lights in the living room because it's time for so many of the seedlings to harden off. And I don't want to be carrying trays up and down the basement stairs every afternoon. Now, every day we're going to increase the amount of time they stay outside. I'm also going to watch the temperature in the morning and wait until it's warm enough to bring them out. Now, soon this patio is going to be full of seedlings. So I went ahead and set up a shelf. Now, right now they're in a protected area where there's less sun and wind, but every day I'll expose them to more and more sun and weather. I have to protect them from digging squirrels and birds too. So I'm using this blueberry bush netting. I'm going to harden these off, bringing them in and out of the house 7 to 10 days. Then I'm going to plant them into the garden 2 weeks after the last frost here in north central Maryland. That means after Mother's Day. Now, I'm not going to need all of these, so most I'm going to give away free. I have a community shelf I've set up behind the garage. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Nights are now above 50 degrees, so it's time to plant our sweet Italian basil. These seedlings are 4 weeks old, and they've been hardening off for 10 days. Now they're going to grow between 18 to 24 inches tall and about 10 inches wide. So I want to space them 12 inches apart. Basil does best planted in full sun. It thrives in temperatures 80 to 90 degrees. I don't plan to feed my basil because my soil is already full of organic matter. Every fall I layer it on. But if you want to feed your basil a general liquid fertilizer, like my favorite, Fox Farm, can be applied every 2 weeks. Now, people tend to plant their basil with their tomatoes, but if you just want rows of basil, you want to space those rows only 12 inches apart, same as the distance you space your plants. It's that simple. Squirrels, robins, and skunks are the biggest diggers in my garden. So I need to protect all my seedlings, and I use hardware cloth. I already had this. I raised quail, and I just used the hardware cloth from their aviary to cut out squares, and I'll surround each plant and secure it with a landscape pin. In the cool weather right now, slugs love to munch down young seedlings. So I use Sluggo. It's organic and it won't harm animals or birds. But the birds do love it, and they'll just peck it all away. So I tend to put it down under the mulch. And this cage, that'll protect the basil from me accidentally stepping on them. If I go to check on the raspberries, or if I go back there to check on the cucumbers, I won't accidentally back up and step on these plants. Now, they don't require staking, but pinching back your basil will make a bushier, fuller plant. Let me show you. Now, hang on, those are too small, so it's not time to pinch those back, but I have some other ones. See how tall these are and how thin? But you can see these new leaves developing here. So go ahead and pinch right above that. And it'll bush out. And you can pinch it back several more times as it grows. Now, it's best to harvest your basil before it flowers. I mean, you can harvest it anytime when it's, about 8 inches taller. But always leave a third of the plant. After it flowers, it gets more bitter. So I'm going to take in what I pinched off and store it in water on the counter. If I put it in the refrigerator, it's going to turn brown. Basil wants 1.5 inches of water every week. And for the first 7 days, I am going to water it every day. Now, what am I going to do with all these that are left over? Well, 2 we'll save for the grandkids, and the rest I'm going to give away free to my community. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Just finished part 3 of our garden tour, so let's go ahead and have our first biggish harvest. Now this is the grandkids' garden. Let's go ahead and harvest some basil to help it bush out better. This will be the second time I've harvested basil. It really helps it bush. And the first time I've harvested the stevia. Like the basil, I want it to bush out and not get all tall and leggy. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today is July 13th and it's time to prune back the basil because it's starting to flower and that'll make it bitter. Pruning and harvesting basil is simple. You could pick the individual leaves or cut the whole stem. Just make sure to leave at least a third of the plant. The stems where they branch off already have new leaves growing. Let me show you. And those will grow back, no problem. Now preserving basil is also easy. I bring it in the house and if it's really clean, I just go ahead and dry it, even without washing. If I'm not comfortable with that, I will rinse it gently in some water and then spin it dry like salad and hang it. Could also use a dehydrator, but it's so hot, we're in a heat wave right now, I don't want to warm up the house. But my favorite way to preserve basil is to process it in oil and freeze it in cubes. I already have a video of that, so I'm going to insert it here. Thank you for visiting Withrow Urban Homestead. See you later. Bye-bye.